Okay, hello everybody, and a massive welcome and thank you so much for turning out, because I know that a lot of people like me have just rushed in from work, so I suspect there'll be still some people joining as we go through the evening. So just a little bit about why we're here. So sorry if I'm distracted, it's because I'm admitting people. So I'm part of a network, a growing network of mainly primary care healthcare professionals across the UK who've become sort of really interested in this idea that the low carbohydrate real food approach is really phenomenally effective in our patients, and seems to work an awful lot better than our previous approaches that we've tried. And so we're all, we've all sort of got our heads together really to sort of share our experiences and see how we can support each other. And we had a meeting in December, and it was lovely to hear how people were getting on and what they're all up to. And we decided we'd do it again. Well, we planned to do it in January, but it didn't happen. So we're doing it in February, and we thought we'd invite some other people along just to sort of share our enthusiasm, really, because I think one thing that we all share in common is that we kind of wish we'd known about this sooner. And I know, David, you've said that, and I certainly feel it. We've only been practicing like this for the last 3 years, and I don't understand why we weren't doing it sooner, because clearly this is so much more effective than what we were doing previously. So what I thought we'd do to start with is we've got a montage just showing some of those people. There's a handful of our sort of doctors and nurses on there, just sort of giving they were allowed 1 minute each. Some of them went over and had to redo it, including me. But it's basically just a quick whistle-stop tour of how just a small selection of us are finding how the low carbohydrate approach is working for us in our individual practices.
My name's Ian Lake. I'm a GP and I have type 1 diabetes, which I manage with a ketogenic lifestyle. In line with many others who use this lifestyle, I have managed to halve my insulin doses, reduce my hypo frequency, and my HbA1c is tending to the normal non-diabetic range. This method of managing type 1 diabetes is easy to learn and safe. I think it should be an option for all people with type 1 diabetes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Neil Moody-Jones. I'm a GP partner and diabetes lead for New Forest Primary Care Network. I have the pleasure to work with Dr. Camilla Jansen and Dr. Nicola Osborne, who are also firm believers in the use of real food, lower carbohydrate diet approach. At the beginning of last year, we introduced a new letter promoting the use of lower carbohydrate diets to our patients with type 2 diabetes. And it included this page with examples of lower carbohydrate foods and also some links to some online resources. These were new patients, and we tracked what happened to the first 14 patients who received my letter. Here you can see the change in their HbA1c. All their HbA1c levels dropped. I've not excluded anyone. They just had a 3-page letter, no medication, some had a conversation. 12 out of 14 dropped their HbA1c level below 48. The average level dropped from 53 to 42. And you can see that even just after 5 weeks, people were dropping their levels significantly. I decided we really needed to spread this approach. And so I started working on a new website as part of our PCN website, which is now live. This includes Dr. Unwin's diet sheet as published in BMJ Nutrition with permission. And it also includes pages on each meal. And here you can see also examples of various lower carbohydrate alternatives for patients. And we've had really nice feedback from patients and clinicians on our website. As a PCN, we hope to halt the growth of type 2 diabetes in our population. And I think my graph shows that this is potentially possible. And also we've got some catching up to do. We really want to try and put over 100 patients into remission. It'd be great if we could reinvest some of that drug budget into CGM, short-term CGM for newly diagnosed type 2 patients, because I think that would be really beneficial. But you can also see some of the other benefits there. 2 minutes, we did it, thanks.
Hello, my name's Gail Goey and I'm a practice nurse. Back in 2014, a patient I was seeing reverses diabetes, and that got me really curious for more information. Since 2016, I've been offering a low carbohydrate approach to help improve and reverse pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure and obesity. In October 2019, I started group consultations for type 2 diabetes remission. Currently, 12 out of the 17 participants have an HbA1c below 48 millimoles. The average weight loss is 10.2 kilos and the average drop in HbA1c is currently 16 millimoles. One lady in the group has completely avoided insulin and reversed her diabetes, and two of the oldest participants, aged 72 and 79, who had diabetes for more than 20 years, have reversed their diabetes and come off blood pressure medication. This is a lady I've recently seen who has lost 45 kilos and dropped her HbA1c from 118 to 29 using a low carbohydrate diet and time restricted eating. I've been a nurse for 22 years and I have never ever seen a drug regime that produces health results like this.
Hi, it's Sam Kwok here. I'm one of the GPs from the Aspen Medical Practice. My partner Nikki Wilson and I run the Eat Real Food program at the Aspen. We basically promote real food first with varying degrees of carbohydrate restriction. The whole program is based around the 4 pillars of health: food, movement, sleep and stress. Like the 4 legs of a chair, all are equally important. We are very ably supported by our fantastic diabetes nurses, and we're very excited as this month we're training all 17 healthcare assistants and nurses in the Eat Real Food approach to support the growing numbers of diabetics and pre-diabetics. We're also massively lucky to have an amazing Eat Real Food patient support group that's run by patients for patients. Very exciting to watch the peer support empower other patients. We are also working collaboratively with Gloucestershire Healthy Lifestyles, as we believe health coaching is definitely the way forward, particularly with patients who are struggling with lifestyle change or who are just generally ambivalent about change. We will be launching Eat Real Food Bite Size, which is the education program broken down into bite-sized videos or chunks on our Eat Real Food website, which we hope to launch in the next couple of months. So watch this space. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Holly Hayward. I'm the practice nurse at Heartland Surgery, and I just wanted to spend a minute today to explain why I feel a low carbohydrate approach is working better than the standard approach within our community. And that's because people are finally understanding how their diabetes works, and that low carbohydrate means that their HbA1c reduces, their weight reduces, and things like their pain get better. Also, things like their breathing with their asthma improves when they lose weight on a low carbohydrate approach. I feel that the job satisfaction is much better now with my diabetes work, and that's because when I see my patients, the majority of the time their HbA1cs are improving and their weight is reducing, which I could never say before when I had my diabetic clinics.
Hi, I'm Ollie and I'm a social prescriber for Coastal Medical Partnership PCN here in New Milton, Hampshire. I've been running low carb groups on Zoom for the past year or so. So I've run 4 cohorts, each with around 4 to 8 patients in each. And yeah, the feedback I've got anecdotally is really good. Although I've never met most of the patients, I've had really good experiences of their feedback, losing weight, feeling better, not really having low carb put to them before as an option to help them manage their weight or reverse their diabetes, or at least improve their blood sugar control. And I think this is a kind of a first tactic in my view. And yeah, I'm keen to push it out far and wide.
My name's Tom Maylands and I've been using a real food lower carbohydrate approach in my clinical practice for about 3 years now. I'm not diabetes lead, but I've engaged my practice to use this option for many patients struggling with obesity, lipid profile problems, fatty liver, diabetes and pre-diabetes, as well as many other areas. And I've seen benefit even from brief verbal advice, maybe some small short written resources. And on a brief search, I can see that there's at least 30 people in my practice that have aborted their pre-diabetic trajectory just with this brief advice. I've also seen improvements in other areas, perhaps obvious areas such as lipid profiles, but less obvious areas like sex hormone profiles. I want to expand this field locally, but also hope that that on a national level, hopefully metabolic health will become one of the key areas of investment for primary care and public health resources, and hope that a low carb approach is a flagship treatment for this. Thanks.
I'm Dr. Ruth Tapsell, I'm a GP in Heartland Surgery in North Devon. We've been, as a team, using the low carbohydrate approach for our patients with type 2 diabetes and obesity for the last 3 years now. And we really have seen some remarkable outcomes during that time. Lots of our patients who have type 2 have got much better control now, and this is without starting new medication. This is often just using diet alone. So currently I think we have about 51 of our patients with type 2 have their HbA1c below 48. That's something that we didn't see before, certainly not without using lots of medications. We're also seeing obviously really exciting outcomes with our pre-diabetics. So the vast majority of patients diagnosed with pre-diabetes will manage to get their HbA1c down below 42. This adds up to us being able to stop lots of medication and also avoiding starting new medication. So this is obviously really exciting because this feels like it must be really good value for the NHS. So we wish we'd done this sooner, and we'd really encourage any other practices out there who are contemplating following a low carbohydrate approach, just to get cracking with it. There's lots of support out there. There's lots of people doing it now.
I'm Dr. Kaiser Singh Sadra. I'm a GP in Slough, Berkshire, a partner there since 1989 and looking after the diabetics since. Practice population of just over 10,600, 90% of them being South Asian origin, and nearly 1,300 diabetics in the practice. Adult prevalence of 16% and an over 65 prevalence of nearly 50%. My low carb journey started around 2003, looking at the glycemic index and then the glycemic load of common consumed foods, then looking at alternatives to the foods with lower GI content. I used the Freestyle Navigator for recording blood sugar profiles for the common foods, and this was the precursor of the Freestyle Libra. I used those blood sugar profiles as a means of educating and convincing patients to change. An audit of 150 patients in 2010 to 2012 showing dramatic HbA1c drops of over 60 millimoles and reducing oral medications. In 2012 to 2014, I did an audit on 290 patients demonstrating HbA1c drops of over 100 millimoles, achieving a massive 116 millimole drop in 4 months. Having been achieving remission since those years, both according to the current guidelines and what I believe to be a more accurate and true remission by confirming with a glucose tolerance test. So highest prevalence of type 2 diabetes in the locality and Southeast, we were one of the highest HbA1c target achievers with the lowest cost of diabetes-related prescriptions. One of the lowest hospital admission rates for diabetes-related problems in the locality. Finally, year on year, despite a challenging population, massive prescribing savings, 33% under national average, 66% savings on insulin prescriptions, and if extrapolated to the nearly 4 million diabetics in the UK, this could lead to a massive £400 million saving each year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Collins. We run an insulin resistance clinic here in Leonsoland in Hampshire. We're currently using lateral flow devices to measure insulin levels and get some interesting graphs. The lateral flow device looks like this. Normal lancet, as you would for glucose. You fill a pipette up to the black line, a little bit more blood than normal, into the well, 4 drops of a buffer solution. Take a picture after 15 minutes and then you get a result. It links to a graphics website where you can get some nice results like this. Insulin sensitive individual, insulin all in the single figures. And here's an insulin resistant patient after 75 grams of glucose. Insulin shoots up to the mid-40s.
Good morning, I'm Dr. Claire Neeland, a GP. I've been using a lower carb approach with my patients for a number of years now for conditions such as type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and obesity. It's really opened my eyes as to how lifestyle can be used to treat and reverse chronic disease, and really how the high carbohydrate, ultra processed Western diet is the cause of so much chronic disease. Patients love the low carb approach, particularly when we start deprescribing, and clinicians really enjoy it because we're not constantly giving patients more and more medication. I'll just briefly share with you a few graphs from the patients, a couple of the patients I've used low carb with, and you can see the amazing and sustainable results that are achieved. In my opinion, low carbohydrate approach should be first line.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sue Beckers, and as a GP, I've recommended real foods to my patients for health. But since 2018, I've been inspired and had training to use therapeutic carbohydrate restriction for diabetes. In groups, in workshops, using books, and the great resources that are out there, speaking holistically to people and metabolically. And people love it. They see their weight and their HbA1cs change in the right direction at the same time as they give up medication, diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, and reflux. They feel well. So if this works, we should be getting this on the NHS. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. David Oliver, I'm a GP.
And my name is Dr. Kim Andrews, I'm also a GP and a gypsy in diabetes, and we work together at the Freshwell Health Centre in rural Essex.
Here's a video to let you know what we've been up to.
So our story starts around 2 years ago when we first heard about a low-carb approach and started suggesting it to some of our family members and patients. And we soon began witnessing some spectacular successes. Meet my dad. He has been overweight my whole entire life, and so I suggested a low-carb approach. And here is my dad just 4 months later, 23 kilos of weight down, pre-diabetes in remission and off his blood pressure medication.
After a bit more research, we started recommending a low-carb approach as first-line dietary advice for our patients. I went to the Public Health Collaboration Conference in 2019, which I found really, really inspiring. Shortly after that, we launched the Freshwell Low Carb Project to try and spread the word across our community. We set up a website for our patients as a basic practical tool to help our patients get started.
After starting our project, we set a community weight loss target of 1 metric ton, and we allowed the patients to monitor their collective progress via our beloved weight loss-ometer, which was kept in the waiting room. And the project also spawned the Freshwell Low Carb Meal Planner, which has now been downloaded over 6,000 times. This is a 68-year-old gentleman with type 2 diabetes who had been taking 72 units of insulin daily for 13 years. He went on to lose 15 kilograms in weight, and his A1C fell from 55 to 42, and he is off all insulin and all his blood pressure medication.
This man, who presented in lockdown with new onset type 2 diabetes, dropped his HbA1c from 114 to 41 in 4 months without medication. After about a year, much to our delight, our patients succeeded in losing their first metric ton. We shared our results with the colleagues in the PCN, and as a result, our first PCN low carb health coach, Sharon, started work late last year. Sharon set up the Colne Valley Low Carb Support Group on Facebook. Sharon now delivers a 6-week structured group education program via Zoom. Before each session, the patients watch a 30-minute recorded video which is presented by ourselves. Each session with Sharon lasts about an hour. The early results look really good, and we are planning to clone Sharon into an army of health coaches.
So that's a whistle-stop tour of the Freshwell Low Carb project. We're now hoping to spread the word across our CCG and beyond, and we're in the process of writing a second recipe book and working on other tools to support our patients. Our patients have so far lost the weight of a small car, and our next target is a double-decker bus.
So just before we go on, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Gail Gary and her husband Ben for the amazing work that they put into producing that montage. So none of us are IT specialists, but I think Gail and Ben have done a fantastic job. So absolutely brilliant. So before we go on and hear from Dr. David, sorry, is there? I thought there was somebody waiting. Just most of you in here know all about what, how the low carbohydrate approach works. A lot of you are seasoned low carb experts. However, I feel like there are probably going to be some people here who aren't familiar with it, and so it might just be worth spending just a minute explaining why this seems to work, or why we think this seems to work so well. So what we tend to explain to our patients is that by reducing their carbohydrates, they tend to feel less hungry. We allow them to relax on the fat. We've been giving them low fat advice all these years, and we say to them it's okay to eat the fats, but concentrate on eating the natural healthy fats. And it seems that there's a combination of reducing the carbohydrates, which reduces our insulin production, but also a little bit more fat in the diet makes people less hungry, and so less prone to snacking. And whatever the mechanism is, it just seems to work time and time again. Obviously, we'll all meet people who don't get it straight off, but it does seem to work for a lot of people. And I loved Kim's story of her dad, because that really resonated with me. I've got an awful lot of patients like that who similarly have just been heavy for a very long time, some of them even since childhood, and once they finally got this idea of actually they need to restrict their carbohydrate intake, they can that's when they start to actually lose that weight that they've been struggling with all their years, and they often feel a lot better with more energy. And the reason why this works is because the the carbohydrates that we eat are digested into glucose once we've eaten them, and this pushes our blood glucose up, and that causes us to produce lots of insulin, and that's, like I said, that's what makes us hungry. So, and I know that David's going to kindly sort of bail me out by filling in the gaps, because I've probably missed a whole load, of important points. But I think what I'll do is I'll hand over to Dr. David Unwin now, who probably started all this for most of us. Certainly myself and many of the other people here today are doing this because we've come across his work and have been so amazingly sort of impressed and inspired, and decided that we really needed to get this going in our communities as well. So just to hand over to David, who, let me get this right, Royal College of GPs clinical advisor in diabetes, is that correct?
Yes, that'll do. So I'll chat on. So we've all been seeing evidence from all of these clinicians. I found that so moving. And when I think back to the beginning, for me, I felt so alone. I didn't know anybody else that was doing low carb. I felt vulnerable. And now to be part of something like this is so very, very exciting. So I think many of us had big smiles on our faces during that, because we identified, and just so amazing, and something that can be done more than once is in a way a kind of evidence. And I'm going to talk to you about the evidence for what we do, because as healthcare professionals, we should be aware that not everybody agrees with this as an approach, and that we should be open to, well, I was wrong before, for instance, I could be wrong again. So it's a good idea just to think about what are the sources of evidence that we're looking at for what we do. So we'll see if I can share the screen now. So this was one of my very early cases. This was Chris, and I've known him for about 30 years. This is him when he was 40. He had already had diabetes for about 10 years. He weighed nearly 20 stone. He had high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, and he was on every medication I could think of. And whatever I did, he wasn't a well man, and he wasn't a happy man. And just like so many of the other doctors we've heard from, here he is now. He's not on any medication. His fatty liver is sorted out. His blood pressure is sorted out. He's been in remission, drug-free remission of his diabetes, I think probably for 5 or 6 years now. So Chris forms a type of evidence, really. He's an anecdote, an N equals 1. And he gives hope, really, because he shows it's possible. It's if something's done once, it can be done more than once, and it gives an idea of hope. In fact, in my practice now, we've replicated Chris's case 93 times. So there's a race to see who's going to get to 100. So we're at 93 cases of drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. So this is one kind of evidence, an interesting case. And certainly it was a case like this that woke me up in 2012 and changed my life forever, because a patient taught me about low carb, embarrassingly. There's Chris now, he's over 60. What a changed man, what a changed man. The next kind of evidence, of course, are RCTs, and people often wonder about RCTs for low carb. This was a well done one. Many of you must have heard of Susan Jebb. She's very well known. Claire Bailey, of course, is also quite well known, and Pam Dyson too, plus Paul Aviard there. So that was an RCT, and the results for the low carb group were very similar to mine. They got 9.5 kilos average weight loss. In my practice, we're getting, I think it's about 9 kilos at the moment. So that RCT was reasonably conclusive. But in fact, there are many RCTs. So the Public Health Collaboration keeps an up-to-date library of the relevant RCTs to do with low carb diets against low fat diets. This is the total now for the comparison as regards hemoglobin A1C. We found 17 RCTs. In black is whether the low carb one or the low fat diet one. 15 against 2. But if you look at the ones that showed significant improvements, the low carb scored 10 occasions and low fat diet didn't win in a single occasion. So that's quite a number of RCTs. There are also meta-analyses now, all hosted on the PHC website for you to see. So that's RCTs. Truth to tell, I'm not a great fan of epidemiology, and I think we should all be reminded that epidemiology suggests association, but does not confirm causation. But nevertheless, I am quite a fan of the PURE study. And this is something published in the BMJ recently, looking at the association between the intake of refined grains and also whole grains against major cardiovascular events and also total mortality. And if you look at the graphs, you can see as the amount of refined carbohydrate, refined grains increases, the major cardiovascular events are increasing significantly, and so is the total mortality. So we have here some epidemiological support, at least, that carbohydrates are implicated in cardiovascular events and also total mortality. Now, another thing that hasn't been talked about much from the PURE study is the effect of whole grains, because people often worry that there are fewer whole grains in a low-carb diet. And if you also look at total mortality and major cardiovascular events, as the amount of whole grain increases, you'll see it didn't really make any difference, which I think is surprising, because we've always believed that whole grains save lives. And certainly from this epidemiology, there was no evidence of that. But there was certainly evidence for linking refined carbohydrates with mortality and cardiovascular events. We now come to the question of, well, does it work on the longer term? A difficult thing to be certain of. This is the data from my own practice published in BMJ Nutrition last October. At this point, we'd been offering the low carb approach to our patients for 6 years. We're now up to 8 years. And this is the data at 6 years, at which point the average duration of the diet for these people, there was 128 people there. The average duration of the diet was 23 months, which is not long term, but certainly longer term. And as you can see, the weight loss there, the average weight loss was somewhere 8 or 9 kilos. The average hemoglobin A1C at the beginning was 65, so we weren't cherry picking easy cases. In fact, I really love the cases with the high hemoglobin A1C because you get the best results. We're going to come on to the lipid results in a minute. I just highlight the significant improvements in blood pressure. And this was despite deprescribing, stopping 20% of all of the drugs the patients were on for blood pressure. And we've written that up as a separate paper. So in conclusion, we were getting 46% drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. So for all those people who went low carb at Norwood Avenue, 46% of them would achieve drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. The pre-diabetics, we did even better. We get 93% of pre-diabetics with a normal blood glucose. Another interesting thing was that older people did just as well as the young ones. Our oldest person going low carb is now 93 years old. We've got many people over the age of 80 and their results are just as good as the young ones. And we've had 4 people come off insulin altogether now, and 9 have at least halved their dose of insulin. So that's some slightly longer term evidence. Just moving on to lipids, because I know there is concern for people that if we're going to be advising a higher fat diet, what happens to the fasting lipid profiles? This amazed me in the early days because everything got better. So you see here, this is the data that we published in BMJ Nutrition. And you can see that the total cholesterol improved significantly. The HDL went up, the protective cholesterol, so that was a good thing. The cholesterol ratio went down significantly. The triglycerides dropped by about 40%. Amazing. So on average, the lipid profiles are so much better than we expected. I think we often forget also that there's really nearly no link between dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol. I've got something coming out on that shortly. And so all this stopping eggs and so on doesn't really result in better cholesterol results, if that is a good thing, partly because of homeostasis, where the liver generates cholesterol. So if you don't eat it, your liver will probably make it for you. Again, we're looking at evidence in this. So there has been a large meta-analysis, actually came from Liverpool University, and they concluded, looking at low carb diets against low fat diets, they concluded, and this is a meta-analysis, a large meta-analysis, that large randomized controlled trials of at least 6 months duration with carbohydrate restriction appear superior in improving lipid markers when compared to low fat diets. And that was a very great surprise. When I read that, I was relieved because their findings were so similar to what we've already seen at Norwood Avenue. So I'm far less worried about lipids than I used to be. There's also questions about, is a low carb diet, does it meet your micronutrient needs? What is it like? And I'm so grateful to Carolyn Zinn from New Zealand, who wrote this in BMJ, where she looked at low carb diets and concluded that low carb, a well-formulated low carb diet exceeds the minimum micronutrient thresholds for everything other than iron. It nearly managed it with the iron, as you see. In particular, I know people are concerned about B vitamins and fiber. They concluded that the B vitamins were fine on low carb diets, and also that the patients were getting quite enough fiber. So that's a very useful paper from BMJ Open. Of course, any diet can be a terrible diet. So we're talking about a well-formulated low carb diet here. I mean, a bad low carb diet could be Diet Coke and I don't know what, burgers, just a burger without the bun, or just poor quality sausages. That would be a poorly formulated low carb diet. We are talking about a well formulated low carb diet, and it seems that we shouldn't worry about the nutrients in those. I often talk about the cost savings. So Open Prescribing, an amazing website, gathers data on every GP in the country. And this is our data. So we're looking at Nord Avenue compared to every CCG in our area. So it's about 17 other practices. We're looking here just at drugs for type 2 diabetes. And you'll see that my practice spends significantly the least of any practice in the area on drugs for diabetes. And that's because if patient after patient, you offer the patient an alternative of low carb or lifelong medication, they nearly all, or in my case, all of them choose low carb. So year after year, our savings are getting greater, not smaller. And in actual fact, we spend £50,000 per year less on drugs for diabetes than is average for our CCG. And it's been calculated on Open Prescribing that if every GP in the country prescribed as we prescribe at Norwood Surgery, you would actually save £277 million per year on drugs for diabetes. So when we say there isn't any money to improve anything, I begin to wonder whether there is something there in our drug budget that we could use in a different way. Oops. Sorry. Share. There we are. We were talking about the low carb approach. One little hint I would say is to say to patients, really, diabetes does its damage because of a high blood sugar. So a high blood sugar over time damages the lining of your arteries. And so it makes sense to try and avoid having a high blood sugar. And the logical first step to avoiding a high blood sugar and the damage that brings about is thinking about where sugar comes from in your diet. And that's the first question I ask patients. Where do you think the sugar comes from in your diet? And of course, in a way, we are backed up in this with our own encouraging high fiber, low glycemic index sources of carbohydrate. So cornflakes, bread, rice, potatoes are not low glycemic index sources of carbohydrate. And this is a reasonable basis for a low carbohydrate diet. And the guidelines point us in that direction. I doubt if we've any listeners from Scotland, but Scotland has absolutely embraced low carb diets now to an extent that they say here options include reducing fat intake, consumption of carbohydrates with a low rather than high glycemic index, and restricting the total amount of dietary carbohydrate to 50 grams per day appears safe for up to 6 months. So in Scotland, the guidelines are clear about low carb. We've also had, of course, in America, where they've also said that reducing overall carbohydrate intake for individuals with diabetes has demonstrated the most evidence, not some evidence or a little bit of evidence, but they looked at this and concluded there is the most evidence for reducing overall carbohydrate intake. Canada, shortly after, have said something very similar. So that's Scotland, Canada, and the USA, all in the last few years. For those of you who want to know more, I would just point out that there is an e-learning module, a Royal College of General Practitioners e-learning module. This has now been accessed by 2,700 GPs across the country. It's free to any of you who want to find out more. I wasn't the only author. Several of the people who are on here tonight helped me write this, and it's been very successful, and we just updated it last year. So we've been thinking about evidence, really, evidence-based medicine. And I think so often when we think about evidence-based medicine, we tend to think about best scientific evidence, which comes from the RCTs, but it's only a third of where evidence comes from. And I absolutely love this paper by David Sackett from the BMJ. It was 1996, thinking about what is evidence-based medicine. So evidence-based medicine does require the best scientific evidence from RCTs and other types of study, but also clinical experience. What we learn and what we see is equally important, and the two need to go hand in hand. So here we are. By individual clinical expertise, we mean the proficiency and judgment that individual clinicians acquire through clinical experience and clinical practice. Otherwise, there would be no point, at least getting older, we get a little wiser and we do learn things from our patients. And the third thing, also so important, is patients' values, their preferences. And you can't deal with a thing like nutrition without thinking about patient choice and patient values. And these three things need to move together for us to make progress with nutrition and diabetes. It isn't just best scientific evidence. So that's the end of this for now. All over the world, clinicians are finding that cutting sugar and starchy carbs is a valid, evidence-based approach to helping people with type 2 diabetes improve blood glucose and also avoid medication. So thank you all. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
I was muted. Thank you, David. Lovely to hear all that evidence, and it's just so reassuring, isn't it? I can imagine for you, as you said, it was quite daunting starting out on your own, but for the rest of us, you're having the benefit of all your evidence, but also we're all growing our own now as well. I've certainly done an audit recently to look at our caseload and been really excited by the results that we've been getting.
I would encourage everybody. I think the power of audit, it's good practice to look at your results. That's what clinicians ought to be doing. And I was forced to do it because I was so vulnerable and scared. But now I love it. And many of you on here are excited by your results. So they're worth looking for.
Yeah, it's definitely where we're getting our job satisfaction from at the moment, I think, isn't it? And I was quite nervous about doing our most recent audit because I thought, having had the pandemic in the way and everybody turning to pizza to comfort themselves, I was absolutely terrified that all our good work had been undone. But we'd had nine more, you know, in inverted commas, remission since then. So it's definitely working. And I can vouch for your cholesterol figures as well. We've only seen improvements in our lipid profiles as well. So yeah, so really, yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're wanting to shout this from the rooftops, isn't it? Is because not only does it work, but it's fun as well, and it's making us all enjoy our jobs that bit more, I think. So there's some questions in the chat. I've sort of been skimming them. I hope I haven't missed too much. Some people are obviously interested in resources. On the Public Health Collaboration website, there's lots of resources on there, including David's infographics. We haven't mentioned those yet, had we? So did you want to have a quick word about those?
Yes. Okay. So I was trying to find a patient-friendly way to explain the glycemic index and the glycemic load to my patients. And I discovered that I was doing a bad job of it. And I had the idea of really recalculating the glycemic load of common foods in terms of something my patients do understand, which is teaspoons of sugar. It is an estimation, it's not absolutely accurate, but generally 150 grams of boiled rice will affect your blood glucose to the same extent or a similar extent as 10 teaspoons of sugar. And those sort of surprising facts are what build up the infographics for common foods that my patients eat and help my patients make better dietary choices, because clearly, as I say, high glycemic index. So a bowl of mashed potato is about the same as 9 teaspoons of sugar. A bowl of cornflakes without any sugar on is 8 teaspoons of sugar. So these infographics, and there are, I think they've been translated now, for which is they've been downloaded millions of times all around the world. There's no copyright on them, and they're all sitting there in the PHC website, hoping that you'll download them.
Absolutely. And we've had so many sort of jaw-dropping moments with our patients. We had a lady in our Zoom group a couple of weeks ago saying, you know, she found it massively helpful. She had no idea that all this, you know, hidden sugar was in her diet. And she was really looking forward to seeing Holly, our nurse, the following week to have her HbA1c checked. And sure enough, she's dropped it by 10 points in 1 month. And she's delighted, having struggled for a very long time. So yeah, definitely look on the PHC website. Other good resources are Diet Doctor has got loads and loads of really good stuff on there. Gosh, I'm going to forget all the important ones, but oh yes, Neil Moody-Jones, who's on the call, is a GP down in the New Forest, has done a fantastic website for his PCN, and he's done a really, really good sort of low carb part of that. So that's got loads of good resources on it as well. Lots of questions. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and ask David anything before we move on to the next agenda item?
How do you actually implement this sort of thing in a GP practice?
Okay, very quickly, I think the most important thing is hope. And when patients understand that they could have better health and that I may not need to start medication, they go from being frightened of diabetes to thinking they can do something about it. And as the years go by, I spend more time trying to give my patients hope, whereas I used to spend a lot of time frightening them with what might happen, particularly as we're about to ask them to do big things for us, like give up bread and rice and so on. So two things. The first thing is hope, and the idea that at Norwood Avenue, nearly 50% of everybody that goes low carb will achieve remission of diabetes. And once you've given them hope, they will then read the leaflets. What I used to do was I missed out on the hope bit, and then my leaflets never got read. But if patients are interested, I get them to do the diet sheet and then see them again and come back with questions. So I've spent my time encouraging them, and then they've read the diet sheet, and often when they come back, they've started doing it already, or they've looked online. But I think the important thing is the idea is hope. And this is why, if we have clinicians who themselves struggle with low carb or don't believe it works, it's difficult for them to enthuse patients. And so in my early days, I wasn't sure, but hope, I think, is partly the key. And that's probably all I should say.
I'd just like to add to that peer support has been really helpful. And I know, David, you've been running groups, haven't you? And we run them on Zoom. And it's so lovely. We just do it once a month now on a Thursday evening. And the patients are all supporting each other and sharing ideas and inspirations and things. And that's a really sort of quite efficient way of managing a large group on a regular basis. Yeah. And with the... Sorry.
And out of that, you get patient experts. I'm so grateful because patients have taught me a lot. And you saw Chris there, but I now have a whole stable of patient experts. And when the feedback is the patients love to hear in groups, they love to hear from patients that have done well, because that gives them hope as well.
Yes.
And there are pharmacists, there are amazing pharmacists running groups.
Yeah.
A number of them internationally, all over the world, pharmacists. So I think pharmacists are well placed to do this.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's lots of pharmacists on the call actually, as well as social prescribers and health coaches. And GPs, I'm sure most of you know, are getting some funding from the CCG through the additional roles reimbursement schemes. And we've been able to employ social prescribers through that, and we'll soon be able to employ health coaches as well, and pharmacists. So between that lot, there's lots of potential for for putting on groups that GPs might not be able to organise. Yeah, absolutely. And Gail and I have been running these lunchtime webinars once a month. We've done our first 2 so far, and the idea behind that is to sort of help practitioners who are just starting out. And we had a really good one. Dr. Campbell Murdoch joined us last time. I think Campbell's on the call, to help people to understand how to safely deprescribe, because obviously when you're asking patients to cut their carbohydrates, you have to be really careful about not causing them problems. So cutting out their glycosides and stopping their SGLT2s and things, really, really important part of this. So if anybody wants to join in with mine and Gail's sessions on a third Thursday, I think, is it, Gail, on a third Thursday of every month, lunchtime. So just send me an email. You've all got my email address now because I sent this Zoom invite to you. So send me an email if you want to be part of that, because we'd love to support anyone that wants to do this. We're going to move on to Dr. Peter Foley next. I'm glad you're still there, Peter. So Peter is let me get this right, Clinical Safety Officer from Diabetes Digital Media. Is that in the right order?
That's it.
Brilliant. And this is the company behind really exciting projects like the Low Carb Programme, which is a digital app, which Peter's about to tell you about, but also what's it called? Diabetes.co.uk, which is different from Diabetes UK, and there's a fantastic low carb forum on there where lots of our patients go and support each other, and there's lots of really exciting stories on there of people who put their diabetes into remission by the support that they've got on there. So handing over to Dr. Peter Foley.
Okay, well, thank you, David, for passing over the mantle. I gave a very brief introduction to what the low carb program was, and we'll do a quick run through in a slide PowerPoint presentation first of all, and then, as said, we'll do a very quick whistle stop tour at the end for those who are still with us. So as I said, the low carb program is a behavior change platform, which really all came about 4 or 5 years ago, and I believe it was on the diabetes.co.uk forum that David Unwin learned more about the low carb approach. And if I'm not mistaken, David may have actually been barred from the group as a troll inadvertently. So it's funny how the world has moved on after so many years.
That's true, Peter. I was barred as a troll.
Anyways, we've moved on a lot in the last several years, and of course, you're not a troll. We're very grateful for you for all you've done for all of us, myself included. So in terms of the low carb program in the UK, it's available. It's an available app on the NHS App Store. It's initially intended for type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes along with obesity. And we're working on hypertension, cardiovascular disease, PCOS, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It was one of the first apps approved in the NHS Apps Library and recognized as an NHS Innovation Accelerator program. It's now available in 6 languages and used by 450,000 members globally. Very excitingly, we're working with 11 CCGs now in England. It's available on Apple products, Android, Apple Watches, on the internet, and also on Alexa, and has been awarded the highest rate for a diabetes app with 92%. There is also an offline option for those who haven't got digital accessibility. What's very exciting is that from a clinician's point of view, and from clinicians who are involved at a CCG level or even a PCN level, there is an ability to track anonymized health data in your area of the country. So we're really big on goal setting and having that hope and identifying what it is for that patient who wants to go on a low carb journey. Is it weight? Is it describing? Is it sleep? Is it mood? Is it all the above? We look at personalized education, a very active community support group. We can track with watches and other health tracking devices. There's one-to-one coaching, and that all is led into a artificial intelligence-led behavior change pathway. We also recognize the importance of accessing this to patients who may not speak English as their first language. We're very popular in the BAME community, and we now have access in several Southeast Asian languages. We also now have, in light of the current pandemic last year, we've got a new COVID-19 support bubble. We've got COVID-19 education series, which has been very popular across the board also. We know clinically that low carbohydrate approaches, when it's one-to-one with a doctor and a patient, or any healthcare professional with patient, can be successful, can be very rewarding. And although it can take time, that time can be it can give more energy than it requires. I often go away from my patients clinically and feel as if I could spend hours speaking with them. Unfortunately, obviously, we can't do that with our patients every day, and there is a role for exploring digital platforms which may be available to our patients. So we have the behavior change aspect of the app, and we also have up to 1,800 recipes which have been made. When patients on board, they say what their budget is, what their allergies are, what their dietary preference is, what culture they come from, what sort of time they have to cook, and we can then create meal plans for those patients. And I stress that these meal plans have been created by dietitians and nutritionists, so experts in their field. Alongside nutritional streams, we also have digital classes for exercise. So we have on-demand classes for yoga, guided meditation, and guided relaxation. And we'll go through what the classes actually look like. Since the pandemic, again, our on-demand exercise classes have been particularly popular with patients, ranging from those who have no previous exercise experience to those who have been participating in exercise groups prior to the pandemic. One of our most recent studies, which is awaiting peer review, is when we were working with 4 practices in the West Midlands. And the intervention that we had at that stage was we handed out access codes to patients at a flu clinic. So 300 patients were approached, up to a 4-minute intervention. They were educated on what the low carb program was and how it may benefit their underlying health conditions. We had 69% of people who were approached logged onto the app and engaged, an average weight loss of 7.2 kilograms with a 9.1 millimole improvement in HbA1c, an average saving of £117 per participation per year in demedication. What's interesting as well is that there was actually a higher acceptance among BAME communities in this study. I mentioned before that the CCGs that we're involved in, and we've got Somerset, Southampton City, Knowlesy, Irwash, Hammersmith and Fulham, Mid-Essex, Haringey, Nottingham City, Kernow and Portsmouth. From a commissioning point of view, we have many sites, as you know. What we do is, if anybody approaches us, we identify what the local needs are for that surgery or for that CCG area, whether that's deprescribing higher rate medication, higher costing medication, or whether it's about weight loss or what the actual targets are going to be, and how we will be measured in how much we're doing for our patients. We get a relationship manager and they go through all the onboarding. There's face-to-face, or certainly pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, there will be face-to-face healthcare training. And also there will be delivery of documents for starter packs, for access codes. So the idea is that when you're sitting in your clinical practice and identify that there may be a patient who would benefit from a digital intervention, they get handed a card, like a credit card size with the low carb program and an access code. When those patients use the access code, they will register on the app for free for the patient, and the NHS or the local CCG will pick up the costs for that patient. The costing of the app from an NHS point of view is £30 per patient for a 3-year contract, so £90 in total. The cost for self-paying is £70 per year, or just shy of £6 per month. to summarize what the low carb program provides, it provides a behavior change support. It looks at family-oriented pathways rather than disease pathways to promote adherence and success. And as David said, patients eat real food. Patients haven't time generally to start weighing foods. It becomes clinical, it becomes difficult, and we want to make this as easy as possible for our patients. We want patients to eat food because patients aren't going to want to weigh food, and it mightn't be the best thing for them. We have evidence that digital interventions are scalable, and we also know that the patients at the end of the app, of the laptop, are so grateful. They're so grateful to have access to an online community of hundreds of thousands of patients. They can ask questions to our health coaches. They can ask questions to other users. If they've got a question about bread, or a question about celery, or a question about butter or bacon or anything, they can ask the community group chat setting, and somebody can say, oh, you know, that's going to be on week 4, and you're going to find out really helpful information on bread. Or what I find is I do this, I do X, Y, or Z, and it's a case of learning from each other, which is a very powerful way to support people to engage and to enjoy what they're doing, and to see this as part of a normal lifestyle optimization journey. The enrollment is very simple, where patients are referred the app. They download the app and enter the code that they said. They onboard with their own information. So they can opt in or out of future research questions. They can opt in or out of sharing data for research purposes. They can say what their medications are, what their allergies are, what their preferred foods are, and they will then get their own personalized journey set out for them based on what they suggested was important for them. It's often sleep, as we said, sleep, weight loss, being more active. And then we can prove their, if somebody says that they want to lose weight, we can nudge them every couple of weeks if they haven't recorded their weight, or if they want to improve their sleep. Again, we can say, you know, you haven't recorded your sleep in the last couple of weeks, and this was important for you. So these resources may help, or these videos on sleep may be helpful for you. So it's a very gentle approach. It's patient-led, and no two patients' experience will be the same based on what they've put in at their enrollment process. From a healthcare system point of view, what's really exciting, and what excites me from a big data point of view, is the ability for local areas to see what their target population is doing. Whenever we send a patient home with information leaflets, we're not really sure what they do. I mean, we have a fair idea with our successful patients who follow a low carb diet, that they come back in a couple of weeks and they're very grateful they've lost weight. They say what they're doing. With the AI facility built within the app, we can see which licenses are being onboarded where. And this is all anonymized data. So if you're living in, let's say Ruth Surgery gets 50 licenses, we can say to Ruth, out of your 50 licenses, we can see that 48 have actually logged on. And of those 48, 30 have completed the program. And of those 30, these patients are doing X, Y, and Z. And it's really helpful for us to give that feedback to clinicians to say, you know, you're giving a patient an access code, but we can tell you from our end, they're doing this, this, and this, and they're engaging or they're not engaging. So it's really helpful to know how we can do this, how we can do it better. And my own, I'm doing some MSc research currently into looking at the engagement within the on-demand exercise classes, how we can improve that, and what barriers are that patients who may be able to do more in terms of exercising or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. I'm on to my last slide, if it will come down. Oh, apologies, my last slide's gone. So, very briefly to finish, looking at the metrics that we record and the feedback we give to clinicians who have purchased the app or CCGs, we can tell how many people have been referred, how many people have actually logged on, what the change in weight is in that population over time. Change in other metrics are, be it HbA1c, be it weight, be it steps, activity, whatever it is. As long as the patients are happy for that data to anonymously be shared, we can share the information to you, the end clinician. So the idea is that this digital intervention is to support what clinicians are doing on the ground. So I'm a clinician working in the NHS practices, and it's important to stress that the role of this and the aim of this is not to take away that very special doctor or clinician-based relationship. It's simply to empower it more, to give more information, to support the messages that have been given across all the different groups across the country on this, to keep going, to have faith in their clinicians, in you guys out there who are spreading the message that low carb can be a very successful option for people if it's what they can, if it's what they choose to do and what they want to do. Here we have David Unwin in his, it looks like the most comfortable chair in England. Patients will only be able to access week one on completing week one and on doing some questions and a quiz. They will open week 2. After week 2 on to week 3, and so on and so forth. So we have obesity and diet, portion control, real versus processed foods. We've also got healthy and unhealthy fats, vegetables, fruit, some videos, snacks and desserts, drinks, alcohol, tips on eating out, more advice on things like nutritional ketosis, practical ways to eat less carbs. So every week has a different approach. Every week has a different message. When we go on to the resources section, and again, the resources section will only be added once patients have finished that week. So if we go into, we'll say week 1, there is a letter for it to take to your doctor to say, I'm interested in the low carb approach. This is what we're trying to do. You've got things like fact sheets on bread, basic information for patients. You've got an option to do vegetarian, an option to do pescatarian. You can do any sort of low carbohydrate diet that you like. If we go into the 7-day low carb Kickstarter and veg, the resources are very helpful and they're made for real patients. They're made for real people out in the community. So they will get something like this. A 7-day guide to kickstart a new way of eating. So tips for low carbohydrate approach. What's really interesting in these resources is that when we go down to the actual information, it gives more information about plate method, what carbohydrate diet is, types of low carbohydrate diets. But when we look at foods, we've got the food lists. We all have our own types of food lists that we use. And this is the one that we use. And you've got things like weight-to-hip ratio, how patients can start, what goals they can set for themselves, short-term and long-term goals. If we go on to, for instance, a meal plan week, we'll just check week 1 here. This happens to be a vegetarian, but you can also have meat if you like, and patients get this meal plan. In the meal plan, it tells about the types of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in this meal. It gives the recipes for the week. It also tells you the shopping list that patients will need to fulfill this week's recipes. And then it goes through each recipe, gives details. It gives you the nutritional value, the ingredients, the time it takes to cook, and often it gives you a scale of how difficult a meal could be. So that in a nutshell is the recipes within the program. You can also build a recipe where you want to eat chicken, or you want to eat a curry, or you're looking for inspiration. That all comes on there, and you can just choose from those 1,800 recipes that you wish to choose from. So we have the nutritional side, and we also have the lifestyle side. And the lifestyle side has been very, very popular in the pandemic era, especially with the exercise classes. And if we look into the bodyweight cardio class with our PT Louise, there's Louise, always very smiling and happy. And these are very simple, non-threatening classes. You can do them whenever you wish. There she is. And we've got a variety of classes including exercise, which you can do sat at a chair, exercise for people with reduced mobility. You can start at beginner level, intermediate, and on to advanced level. You've also got the discussion forum. You've got questions that are being asked. You've got questions which are trending, and these will all be checked by our health coaches who have modified the groups and make sure all information being shared is accurate, and signposting to further resources that patients may wish to have. So we've got several resources using a lot of Dr. David Oman's work already, and we thank David always for his ongoing support for this. And different patients will want to use different parts of the program, and that's all down to what their own individual goals are. So that is the program in a nutshell. I'm going to stop sharing now and send it back to you, Ruth. Hopefully it goes okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Excellent. Thank you.
Really beautifully put together, and I follow them on Twitter, and I love it when they give notifications about their exercise classes, and there's some really lovely success stories, you know, before and after pictures and all that stuff, and lovely recipes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to talk to you a bit about health coaching. I will stick to 10 minutes. I know there's a couple of other speakers to come. I'm afraid I'm not going to teach you how to be a health coach in 10 minutes. I'm really sorry I can't do that. But I'm hopefully going to give you a few things to think about along these lines. So who am I? So I'm a GP partner in Sheffield. I'm one of the clinical directors, one of the 1,000 around the country now of a PCN. I've been personalised care lead in Sheffield for 7 years, and I'm a director of a health coaching company. So watch out, I've got skin in the game. Okay, so this is really just a few thoughts from me to stimulate your thinking, really. So I'm really interested in performance. You know, I want what I do and the system I work in to work well. And what I'm interested in is a system that creates health and well-being. And what I've come to realize is that there are different dimensions that create that. There's obviously the health considerations that we're already familiar with: primary care, secondary care, community mental health. There's the social settings, so, you know, the formal social care, community care, you know, and the kind of cultural aspects of where you live and where you are. And then, of course, there's your self-care, you know, what you do as an individual, but also what you collectively as a community. And we want that to be proactive, resilient, and capable. And in fact, when you look at the evidence base, actually, if you looked at the proportions of what contribute, really sorry to say, guys, that health considerations are pretty small. When the King's Fund look at this in real detail, self-care is probably 5 times as important as the health considerations. And your social considerations, you know, what Michael Marmot calls the social determinants of health, far outweigh the health ones as well. So if we're interested in performance, we've got to be interested in what makes the biggest difference. So for me, I am really interested in how we do this coordination between the health and the social interactions, but I'm also really interested that both those two drive, and one of their key purposes is driving towards building self-care. And I think if you're going to sort of describe these new roles, probably the link workers and social prescribing sit on this side, driving social considerations towards self-care, and the health coaches perhaps sit on this side, driving health considerations. So I'm going to just talk a little tiny bit about person-centered care as well, because I think this is quite crucial in the setting of the NHS publicising that we want to move, our 10-year plan moving towards person-centered care. And if you ask anybody, everybody says they're person-centered. Of course, everything I do has the person at the centre. And we spend a lot of our time, using our real in-depth experience and skill to advise people, to direct, to apply our medical knowledge and skills towards people at the centre. And I'd suggest to you, can be, if you're not careful, a very constricting dynamic for the person at the centre of all that attention. And actually, what I would like to propose to you is a slightly different way of looking at it, really, where the person's still at the centre, but our main focus is appreciating their fears, their hopes, as David beautifully articulates. I love that. It's stuck with me, David, since you told me first time. Their expectations, and we tailor our care to what matters most to them, and we value and encourage their skills and their knowledge. And this becomes more of a sort of growth, outward, person-centered approach. And to do that, there's a whole set of skills and tools and systems and measures that wrap around it. And you'll not be surprised to hear me say that I think the coaching approach is a bit of a golden thread that runs through this. It affects the way we think about things and the sort of belief model we hold. It affects the skill set we practice, and it also affects the way we design the system. These things don't work unless the system supports it. So health coaching then. So I would put to you that health coaching is a combination of two really crucial skill sets. So there's the health expertise that most of us have, you know, our knowledge and experience to be able to diagnose things and assess risk and work in a person-centered way. And you're combining that with the coaching mindset and the coaching skill set, which is a very deliberate set of behavior change, well evidence-based, well experience-based tools and models and goals and techniques. And it takes time to learn them. And I would say health coaching sits in the middle, really, where you take the best of both those two things. So the debate for me is who delivers the health coaching? You know, who is best to deliver it? Is it health experts who learn coaching and deliver the health coaching? Is it coaching experts who learn a bit of health and do the health coaching? Or is it a combination of each? And when we think about the low carb setting, I think this is an ideal context. So we've already heard health coaches mention a lot tonight. And this is an ideal example of where you get this beautiful combination of medicalized approach combined with a social or personalized approach. So, you know, from a low carb approach, you know, we have to raise awareness of the need, don't we? You know, we make the diagnosis of you know, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes. We can feed back people's blood results and their blood pressure and BMI. We can assess the situation. But then clearly there's a need for relevant knowledge, isn't there? So we need to know that the low carb is an option and that it can be a viable option, and people need to know what to do. You've seen some fantastic evidence tonight of resources and tools. So there's a sort of knowledge base. And then where coaching comes in is how you then actually enable that to happen. Really easy to say, isn't it? But actually in the context of really busy, often overwhelming lives, it can be really, really difficult to apply it. And that's where the coaching really comes in. And if you were going to, I sort of think of coaching almost, it's two things really. It's raising awareness and creating ownership. So awareness of what matters most to the person in their life, and contrasting that to the context of what's actually going on, all the restrictions and the you know, the realities of life, and helping people to build their skills and their confidence. And this word disposition, you know, a combination of their motivation combined with what actually they have ability to do, and then putting into a genuine plan people can carry out. And these are the skill sets of coaches. And, you know, maybe, you know, we can look and think about where we want to see who doing what. Is this all a medical person? Is it a nursing skills, dietitian skills? Is it a dedicated health coach? And of course, it's not linear, just one direction, is it? It may well be that this happens as well, that people pass back and want to get some medical information, perhaps when they've realized they've got more space in their life. And perhaps that arrow should be more of a circular motion, shouldn't it, as we go around these cycles of change. So in terms of the workforce to deliver this, you know, I'm really acutely aware as a PCN clinical director that we've got this new budget, haven't we, for new roles, additional roles, and they include health coaches. Health coaches are on there now. We can purchase health coaches. We can purchase care coordinators. And for a while, we've been able to purchase link workers that link people into social prescribing and the sort of social enablers to let them make this happen. But what we also mustn't forget the skill set of the rest of the team as well. So if this is going to work well, we need teams that hold a similar sort of perspective to people in this group and that understand the value of you know, the combination of the medical skill sets, the knowledge and the coaching. So the Personalised Care Institute was set up September 15th on my birthday. Funnily enough, it was launched. So it's being hosted by the Royal College of GPs, and their duty, their role is to set a curriculum around personalised care and to see it enacted. And what at the moment they've come up with, and it will be an evolving space, is they talk about a sort of basic 2-day core training for personalised care approaches, coaching approaches, which is aimed at sort of core medical staff, really anybody actually wants a good insight into how it works and will practice it a bit, but it won't be their core day-to-day, everyday approach. And they then recommend a sort of perhaps a deeper 4-day course dedicated towards levelling up the skills of people that are going to use, you know, coaching approaches as a mainstay of what they do day in, day out, perhaps seeing people for 40 minutes, an hour at a time. And backed up with ongoing support, mentoring, and then sort of some additional vocal training. And I think this is what the Personalised Care Institute sees as a general approach to how we take things forward. And you know, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, when I come back to performance, really, in that you don't see many high-performing organisations where a lot of money gets invested, and you know, where performance is very dependent on what people do, without enlisting coaching. You know, you don't get many football clubs that don't have coaches. You don't get many high performing businesses that don't invest in coaching and skill set. So if we know that what patients do for themselves is absolutely the best way for our system to get better performance, I would suggest to you that coaching is a really, really important part for us to focus on. So there's my details. I thought I'd be short and sweet. I figured there would probably be a squeeze on the agenda at this stage of the evening. We run courses through Peak Health Coaching. We're one of the registered PCI providers. I'm really happy to engage in conversation on Twitter or through our websites to hear more. And I really hope that many of you will continue your journey in coaching. I know many of you already are expert coaches, but I think our mission as a team is to show how this system can work together.
Ollie, thank you so much. That's really, fantastic to hear about that. I'm a big believer in how important a coaching approach can be. We've all seen it with our patients, how they don't respond well to being told what to do they? It's much more effective if you can actually get them to work out what the solutions are. So Kathy and David Cavan, are you still there? I can see Kathy. I'm obviously really bad at introducing people, I've noticed. So can I just say over to you, Dr. Kathy Hoffman, and let you take it from there?
So I'm just going to do a very quick introduction, really, to just set the scene for David, who's going to come in and do the main bit of talking. That the focus so far has been very much on type 2, really, and I come into this as a GP, but also as a diabetes lead for Buckinghamshire CCG, and I also have a role as a chair of a Diabetes UK, local Diabetes UK group. And I started my low carb journey probably 4 or 5 years ago, like everybody else in the type 2 arena. But as a result of my contact with colleagues in the Diabetes UK group, some of whom had type 1, about 2 or 3 years ago, I became conscious. And I think it was around the time when Freestyle Libre started to become available to them, that they were beginning to trial low carb diet. And it was the Freestyle Libre that was giving them the confidence, because they were able to monitor their blood sugar so much more easily. And that they were having interactions with the specialists that they're looking after them, because type 1 in the main is deemed the preserve of secondary care. So general practice doesn't really get involved as a rule with patients with type 1, albeit that some 30% of patients with type 1 don't actually go to secondary care, but that's another story. The interactions they were getting were quite difficult. So it felt uncomfortable when they went into the hospital and told their specialist nurses or consultants that what they were doing. And I had some conversations with some of the specialists I dealt with around the time, and they said they were aware that this stuff was happening, but they were just watching from a distance. They weren't getting involved. And of course, there was no evidence, etc. 2 or 3 years later, into my inbox, in other words, just recently, last 2 or 3 months, into my inbox pops an article about a group of runners who ran 100 miles over 5 days, ate no food, and if that wasn't mad enough, 2 of them had type 1 diabetes. And the article didn't mention death or any serious medical problems. And I just thought, well, this completely confounds everything I know about type 1, because that's not possible. So I got in touch with 2 of my local consultants, diabetologists, and said, help, can you explain this? Because I'm completely confused now. And they said, so are we. And what has happened is that so many people with type 1 are now experimenting with low carb, that there is now a population out there. And the purpose of this run that Ian Lake, who's on the call, initiated, was to prove the potential role of low carb ketogenic diets in the management of type 1. But so many people are now doing it that specialists are faced with the fact that there is a body of people who have more experience of low carb in type 1 than they do, and to presenting them with problems such as, if you are managing your type 1 using the ketogenic approach, you run ketones that are very high, the sort of ketone levels that warrant admission to hospital if you are not using the ketogenic diet, but which don't warrant hospital admission if you are using the ketogenic diet. But then if you're a specialist and you're confronted with someone who's running high keto, how do you manage the sick day rules? So there is some real dilemmas for specialists who have kind of got left behind. And my conversations with the two consultants resulted in the request for some help to find out more. And as a result of that, I organised a webinar for the consultants at the local Bucks Healthcare Trust, and also we were joined by a consultant from Oxford, with David Cavan, who is an endocrinologist who'll introduce himself, and Ian Lake, GP, who organised the run, to give their perspective on this approach to management of type 1 diabetes, which has become something that specialists are having to get their heads around, having observed from a distance for possibly too long, really. And I'll hand over to David to give his take on the subject.
So my name is David Cavan. I am down south in the New Forest, which you can behind me. And I became interested in low carb about 10 years ago when I was a consultant at Bournemouth Hospital, and actually in type 2 diabetes. And as David Unwin said earlier on, I felt extremely alone in that. So it's just fantastic to spend time with well over 100 people who are also not fazed by low carb. But my interest then moved to using low carb in type 1 diabetes, and I'll just take you through some of the slides. When you've been around as long as I have, you collect slides that you've been using for a very long time. I used to show this slide about 20 years ago when the new insulin analogs came about, and we thought that that meant that people with type 1 diabetes could free themselves from the restrictions that they were previously under. If you go back to the 1980s and before, people with type 1 diabetes were not encouraged. They're very much told you needed to fix your lifestyle, make it really quite rigid. You had to fix your activity levels, you had to fix your diet, which was essentially a low carb diet, certainly a no sugar diet. And you had to do that because your insulin dose was fixed as the same dose every day, one injection, or if you're lucky, 2 injections a day. By the early years of, the 2000s, all that had changed because we had these very fast-acting insulins, we had newer analogs, and that meant that really you could, if you had type 1 diabetes, you could do what you like and you could eat what you like as long as you inject the right amount of insulin. And so we developed this concept of the modern management of type 1 diabetes, which is based on a basal bolus regimen you'll be familiar with. Long-acting insulin to do what the pancreas does when you're fasting or between meals to keep your glucose nice and stable, and then bolus, or so-called fast-acting insulin, but it's not always that fast-acting, to cover your meals. And people with type 1 diabetes need to be taught how to work out the amount of insulin they need to give according to the carb intake, according to their glucose levels, and according to many other things. And that means that unlike in type 2 diabetes, people with type 1 diabetes really do need to know how to count their carbohydrates. If you've got all that right, then you can, so the story goes, eat whatever you like as long as you inject the right dose, and you can undertake sport and physical activities. Just heard you can run 100 miles with no calories and survive it as long as you adjust your insulin accordingly. However, that's the theory. The practice is much, much more complex. What you've got at the bottom there, that is the equation at how to calculate a bolus dose. It is a very, very complex mathematics, and it requires inputs of lots of different variables, some of which are no more than guesstimates. And so it's no wonder actually that it can be really difficult. So if we look at these principles, first of all, a basal insulin. So often I find myself asking someone with type 1 diabetes, why is your dose of basal insulin what it is? How do you know you're on the right dose? And very often they're on that dose because they're on that dose. So people need to be taught, encouraged, explained how to get on the right dose, because if they're on too much, then they're going to be at risk of hypoglycemia or forever being hungry. The bolus insulins, many people have not really been properly taught carb counting, and they still take the same dose with every meal. Even those that have been taught, if you've actually made them food yourself and you've weighed all the ingredients, you can perhaps be quite exact, but if not, it is, as I said, a guesstimate. And but we can accept that to some extent. But I think the key thing for me, and one that's really influenced the way I think about low carb in the last 5 years in particular, is that, of course, unlike the normal functioning pancreas and insulin secretion system, glucose from a meal and insulin from a subcut injection, they enter the circulation at different rates via different routes. So even if you calculate the carb content right and you give the right insulin dose, depending on how slowly or quickly that carbohydrate is absorbed, either the insulin or the carb could get to the bloodstream first, causing either hypo or hyperglycemia. And what a lot of people will end up doing is they've had the message they can eat what they like, they can do what they like, they play safe, and may well be running their glucose levels high. If they do that, they may then find that they need to increase their insulin doses, and people can end up on really quite high insulin doses with high risk of hypoglycemia, but also, of course, risk of weight gain. And so we see, particularly, I see so many people with type 1 diabetes who are now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are beginning to look very much like their type 2 diabetes. They may have had diabetes since they were a child. And progressively, as a result of their higher carbohydrate intake, they're requiring high insulin levels, which promotes weight gain and insulin resistance. And it sets up this sort of vicious cycle, which is exactly what we see in type 2 diabetes. Of course, that's then made even worse, or it is promulgated, it is promoted by a high carb intake, which is or was until relatively recently the standard advice for anyone with diabetes, and by ever increasing insulin doses. So we get into this vicious cycle where we get what is so-called a double diabetes. And it then becomes really obvious that if you have someone who is overweight with type 1 diabetes and they're on high insulin doses and they're looking like they're insulin resistant, just as someone with type 2 diabetes, what we really need to do is reduce those insulin levels to enable them to lose weight. And the only way that you can reduce your insulin requirement that I'm aware of in type 1 diabetes is by reducing your carbohydrate intake. So actually encouraging people deliberately to use their meals by choosing lower carbohydrate meals as part of their management of their type 1 diabetes really can help people lose weight, reduce the risk of hypoglycemia. They get less glucose variability because you're not pushing up your glucose so much every time you eat, just as in type 2 diabetes, and often a lower HbA1c. And I'll just show this one graph of one person who I first saw 6 months ago. You can probably guess when I saw him, but this is his weight from when he was a young child, right through his life, through his 20s and 30s, and he's now about 40. And you can see he's gained around 20 kilos in his adult life. When I met him, he was on 86 units a day, very much fixed doses. He was on obviously quite a high carbohydrate diet because he'd had no real concept that he needed to do anything different other than eat what everyone else eats in this country, which is very much a high carb diet. Within a 15-minute consultation, I introduced him to the concept that, and he was very keen to lose weight. If he's able to make changes to his diet, if he's able specifically to cut down on starches, then he can reduce his insulin doses, and then he's got the hope of losing weight. And here we are 18 months later, 16 months later, he's lost nearly 19 kilos and he's on about half his amount of insulin. He's not on a ketogenic diet. All he's done is, in the same way that others have described, just give some pointers as to the types of changes that will help. And I have quite a number of people who are doing this now. I'll skip over this, but there is both short and longer term evidence for the benefit of a low carb diet in type 1 diabetes of between 50 and 75 grams in these two different studies. And to the people who say to me, well, we don't have the evidence for low carb in type 1 diabetes, and this was posed at the meeting the other week, my retort is, well, what was the evidence that led to the recommendation of a high carb diet from the 1970s onwards? Because until the 1970s and 80s, the standard recommendation for anyone with diabetes was a low carbohydrate diet up to around 75 grams a day. And it's in the last few decades that you can see it's progressively got higher. So to my mind, low carb is not new. It's the obvious diet for anyone with carbohydrate intolerance, which includes people with type 1 diabetes just as much as type 2 diabetes. So they were the recommendations 15 years ago. What about now? Well, low carb diets are now not supported explicitly by Diabetes UK. However, they do say there's no convincing evidence for a recommended ideal amount of carbohydrates for maintaining long-term glycemic control, i.e., there's no set carb intake that is required. The American Diabetes Association has come out very clearly to say that a low carb eating pattern may have potential benefits for adults with type 1 diabetes. And Ian Lake pointed to this in their guideline, their UK guideline or England guideline for type 1 diabetes has absolutely no comment. They specifically did not even look at lower carbohydrate diets for type 1 diabetes. So how low is low carb? To my mind, it's whatever level is needed to improve the issue to be resolved. I've found, and other studies have shown, between 75 and 100 grams is sustainable for many people. It enables them to enjoy carbs, and they have the flexibility with their insulin. They can, give a higher dose if they want to have a higher carb meal. And that's the basis of the dietary advice that I put in my book for people with type 1 diabetes. We then have Dr. Bernstein, who's an amazing figure. I have time to go into his story, but he lived with type 1 diabetes for many, many years in the States until he discovered that if he reduces carbs to 30 grams a day, it really transformed his life. Not only did it normalize his glucose control, but it reversed many of his long-term complications, which we all thought and he thought would have been permanent. And then there's a low-carb, high-fat ketogenic diet that Ian Lake is far more expert on and can talk about than I can. I don't necessarily advocate that. I'm very happy to support people who choose to follow that approach, and I have a number of patients who do, and they do very, very well. We often have to educate, or they have to educate their health advisors, that there is a huge difference between nutritional ketosis and pathological diabetic ketoacidosis. But once we've got over that, it shouldn't be too much bother. So very much just key take-home messages. My first actually would be, and it's not on here, is that I think we should stop saying to people with type 1 diabetes, you can eat whatever you like, because I think it's setting people up to fail. I'm very happy to say you can eat whatever you like as long as you give the right insulin dose, but it will be very difficult to achieve really stable glucose control. It'll make your life so much easier to choose lower carbohydrate meals. It is safe in type 1 diabetes, and it can be particularly effective in those who wish to lose weight, reduce insulin resistance, glucose variability, or risk of hypoglycemia. And it is, however, essential to make sure people are on appropriate insulin doses before they embark on this, obviously in order to avoid hypoglycemia. And I'll stop there.
David, thank you so much. Really inspiring and reassuring to hear that talk. I just wanted to point out that, there's so many of us here in this group who have had amazing successes with our type 2 diabetes by reducing carbohydrate intake, and we've often got this thing in common where we're itching to try and help our type 1s as well, because it feels almost discriminatory not to help them in the same way. But I suppose one of the barriers is that they're so involved with secondary care, and it's very difficult to do this when the patients are getting mixed messages. So it's lovely to hear from an endocrinologist that actually the lower carbohydrate approach is appropriate and indeed safe. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And I just wanted to say there was a good paper, wasn't there? Is it Belinda Lennox did a really good paper, if anyone wants to look it up, which showed that this is a really good and really safe approach for type 1s. Did anybody have any questions for David? I know there's lots of diabetic specialist nurses on the call, if anybody, and dietitians as well, if anybody wants to unmute themselves or put up their hand. I can see Emmanuel's hand is still up, but I think it's a legacy hand. It's been up the whole time. So is there anybody else that would like to ask any questions, or indeed Emmanuel, if that is a current hand? Well, I'll say something then.
Yeah.
I had a lovely chat with Ian Lake, who's on the call, about 6 months or so ago, when I had a type 1 patient who I was sort of scratching my head over and wondering how could I help this person, and Ian, you were very reassuring and said actually people with type 1 adults, they're very experienced at carb counting, and actually they're very competent at adjusting their insulin doses. So so long as you're careful and you warn them, but they know anyway, obviously. There's really, it's not rocket science, is it?
I think the key thing is, so hopefully most people with type 1 diabetes will be familiar with the concept of an insulin to carbohydrate ratio. Now, you need to have some confidence that their ratio is correct for them, i.e. it might be 1 unit for every 10 grams of carbohydrate. But if they are, then that you can very safely let them rip and reduce their carbs, because they will automatically reduce their insulin in mealtime insulin doses. Once they begin to lose weight, which they will if they're overweight, then they may need to reduce their basal doses because they'll be more insulin sensitive. But there's a lot of fear, if you like, about insulin treatment and so on and so forth. But especially with people with type 1 diabetes, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I see there's a note from someone saying that secondary care do low carb as well. That's fantastic to hear. I've worked in a number of secondary care settings in recent years. Some have absolutely no problem with it. Others, it's like I'm suggesting something horrendous. It is very individual, and people bring along their own beliefs.
There's a question about children, David. What's your take on the lower carb approach with type 1 children?
My official answer is no comment, because I'm an adult diabetologist and I can't really comment on children under the age of 16. However, I am aware of a number of parents who very successfully manage their younger children with type 1 diabetes with a low carb approach. And it just works so well in many children as with adults. In fact, just yesterday, I saw a patient with a man with type 1 diabetes. First time he pitched up in clinic for a long time, and his 5-year-old child had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So we ended up having a discussion about how they might both benefit from a low carb approach.
There's a really good Facebook page, isn't there, called Type
1 Grit.
Type 1 Grit, thank you. And I think, am I right in thinking that's actually sort of administered by a young man called David Dykeman, who's had type 1 for a long time, and he's been low carb.
Yeah.
I think his dad's an engineer and is a really smart guy who worked out how this was a good approach for them.
David Dykeman's the father of I can't remember the boy's name, but he started at age 7 as a type 1 diabetic, and he's successfully gone through a whole keto lifestyle, but he's more of an extreme keto. I think children do very, very well, and there's good evidence that on the sort of diet that David's sort of recommending or more confident with, that's where all the evidence is, from a guy called Nielsen in Sweden. And they, over 4 years, they showed that 75 grams of carbohydrates a day resulted in 5 times fewer hypos. So for children, it's very, very safe. If you're a parent and send your kid off to school, I know you've got all these phones now that link up to their pumps, but it's very reassuring to know that they're likely to be safe. So low carb is far safer. So if patients want to do that, and I think David's book is an excellent starter, and I would recommend that over Bernstein. Bernstein's very good, but he's very much ultra keto, and he does put a lot of people off. In fact, when I first looked at it, I took a year out and think I was a bit extreme, and now I'm ultra sort of extreme. But I think people have to start, and if they get into it, they'll always drop as they get more and more absorbed in getting their glucose near to the normal level.
Yeah. And there's obviously a bit of an old-fashioned concern, isn't there, about how children need carbs to grow? And I love David Dykeman's son as an example, because he's a really keen sportsman, isn't he? And he's now, I think, is he sort of 17 or 18, and he's nicely fully grown, a nice normal size, and has managed to maintain his very active athletic lifestyle with low carb.
Ruth, can I just pick up on that? David's got a fantastic slide which he showed, which takes you back to the dietary components, the macro components going back, I think it was the 1940s or 50s, David, and you bring it forward, and he shows how the normal carbohydrate intake going back to the 40s was compared to what we eat now, low. Fat content was much higher, protein content. That was normal. And our modern, you could argue that our modern diet is where it's abnormal. We eat far too much carbohydrate. So actually, we're not eating lower carbohydrate, we're eating normal carbohydrate for the human.
Yeah.
What we are now eating is high carbohydrate diets. And I think that's where we've got to change the language. And so, well, someone recently was circulating about talking about normal carbohydrate diet and not low carbohydrate. They're not low, they're normal. 75 grams of carb is not low.
Yeah, absolutely. And people worry about increasing your fat and increasing your protein, don't they? I know that there's been lots of people who are twitchy about high protein and will that damage people's kidneys, because a lot of diabetics, type 1 and type 2, are prone to obviously nephropathy. So how, what's the safe level of protein to intake? And certainly with one of my type 1 guys, I said to him, could you just work out how much protein you're taking in a day on your lower carb approach? And was very relieved to see that it was a perfectly normal amount of protein. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head now.
But on those higher fat, higher protein, lower carb diets going back decades, people were not on dialysis, they were thriving, they were slim. Yeah. That was a healthy diet. That was a healthy, the constituents were healthy. We are eating an unhealthy diet. Our generation is unwell. This is the generation that has the problem. And that's what we've got to do. And those people who keep persuading us that you can't change from this one because there's something dangerous about changing from it, have to explain how we got into the mess we've got into.
And just to go back to the protein and fat issue, I think I'd echo what David Unwin said much earlier on. Is I would actually not ask someone how much protein they're eating or fat they're eating. What I'm interested in is what are the types of foods they're eating. Are they maintaining them in a healthy metabolic state and with good blood glucose levels? And it would be very difficult. I think the other thing that really gets me is when people raise these arguments. Well, what would you rather have? Would you rather have someone with an HbA1c of 35, 40 on a low carbohydrate diet, a low carb, high fat diet of normal body mass index, feeling very fit and well with no hypoglycemia, or someone who's eating the right high carb diet with an HbA1c of 70? And all the risks and overweight and experiencing hypoglycemia. We can always find an argument to criticize something, but I think encouraging people or just giving people options and enabling them to find what works for them often will, as you all know, be successful.
Can I ask David what the resistance is in secondary care to the low carb diet when there's all this evidence coming out that it is much more beneficial than a lot of medication that's coming out? Where is the resistance coming from? Or what's the concern?
I think some people. So we've already heard that a lot of people with type 1 diabetes know far more about low carb diets and they've embraced it themselves and they're doing very, very well. Dare I say it, there is a breed of health professional who doesn't like to be told by a patient and wants to put their own views across. I have personally come across some very strong resistance from specialists, dietitians in particular. I've also come across huge support from specialist dietitians. You can't, I hear people saying, it's the dietitians are the worst. It's not. There are individual people. And just like all of us, what we learn first, we learn best. And if you've been trained, as most of us have been, that a healthy diet is a high carbohydrate diet, and especially if you're a dietitian, it's been ingrained into you that the body needs 130 grams a day, which is what people were taught, as I understand it, then it takes some courage actually to undo all of that. And some people find it easier than others. So I don't think we could say it's, secondary care resistant and primary care are all for it. Primary care are all for it. That is great. But there will be people who have been trained in diabetes, who are specialists in diabetes, who learnt it a particular way, and who find it difficult to change. I'm afraid that's sort of the story of my life, has been encountering people who think that I'm a bit strange coming up with new ideas, but you know, I think it is changing. So when we did the talk a couple of weeks ago, there were people, you know, as a consultant, I'm not quite where she was from, and she said, well, what you're telling is that's just what I do. And I thought, well, that's fantastic. So it's not ubiquitous, it's not everywhere, and but I haven't got an easy answer. You know, if you are stuck in an area where there is resistance in your local specialist centre, given the way things are set up in this country, I don't know quite how to address that.
I thought the way you addressed it in Buckinghamshire was fantastic, and I'd love to do something similar down in the southwest. Ellie, you've got your hand up. Would you like to say something?
I just wanted to say, as a secondary care diabetes specialist dietitian, I do use low carb in type 1 diabetes. I've had a few pumpers who we've been able to make great changes to HbA1c and both basal and bolus doses by following probably somewhere between maybe about an 80 and 100 grams of carbs a day. They were competent carb counters, and they had the skills to be able to self-manage a lot of that change with support from the secondary care team, kind of as needed. So I'm not against doing it, for sure. I think quite often it's not, the patients aren't always wanting to go down that route, and you know, as I said before, that the diet that's going to work best is the one the patients feel they can stick to longer term. And I think one of the things we've been very conscious of in secondary care is that we didn't want those patients to then be entering that yo-yoing weight loss and weight gain cycle that can be so damaging, and that we've seen with some of our type 2 patients. That's kind of been our perspective in secondary care, but it's definitely, you know, something that we have looked at with our patients and do.
Ellie, thank you. You're absolutely right. I know your team, and you're a very open-minded bunch, so I'm grateful. But unfortunately, that isn't the case in some of in departments. But the same with.
But I think have that discussion with your diabetes specialist dietitians. You know, open that discussion up and get the ball rolling on whether, you know, maybe start small, maybe start at 130 grams of carbohydrate and just kind of get the patient's feedback. It's all about them at the end of the day.
You know, there are sort of ways to do it. I think any mention of the word keto is bound to put up barriers, because you'll get into the whole ketoacidosis thing. So I never ever mention that myself. One thing that I think is really going to make a massive difference, and that is, you know, use of continuous monitors, Freestyle Libras. So just as in type 2 diabetes, you know, when people get a Freestyle Libre and they can see the impact of their cornflakes in the morning, and you know, I spend half my now asking people, well, why do you think that your glucose has gone up to 15 after breakfast? And they've never seen it before because they've never had the wherewithal. Yeah. I think that is going to lead to a lower carb approach in people who've got those monitors and want to get more time in range.
I know we're busy. I just want to say one thing. I've done a survey on my website. I've got now 115 people, and fewer than 10% got their help or information from their healthcare professional, and 80 or 90% actually just went on the internet and did it. And most of those people, because my site is an unashamedly keto site, went right down to 30 to 50 grams of carbs quite successfully, despite the fact that half of the healthcare professionals actively discouraging doing it. So that means half. So half are not discouraging, which is to me encouraging. So in every hospital department, you will find somebody that's sympathetic to you, to what you want to do, which is all that matters. You don't need everybody to do it, you just need one person to support you.
And people are finding out on social media, aren't they? And often, I mean, there's a few of us that are really, quite active on Twitter about this. And I know that whenever we post something about how good low carb is in type 2 diabetics, often you get a type 1 jumping in saying, don't leave us out, we want this too, and there's this hashtag, we're not waiting, isn't there? People aren't going to wait for their professionals, they're just going to get on and do it. So yeah, I mean, good on them, but let's help them to do it safely.
I think the shame of it is it feels like such a postcode lottery though. So, Ellie, great that you're open to doing it with some of your patients, but if the patient's lucky enough to see a dietitian like you or an endocrinologist like David, but the majority and the fact is that most aren't seeing healthcare professionals open to it. So, it seems really unfair.
Thank you, Gail. I think that really is the crux of it for me. I'd rather be supporting somebody through the changes they want to make rather than maybe doing it blind and not having that support and feeling quite isolated and alone in doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's 9:30. I thought this was going to go on for an hour and a half, and we've gone on a bit longer than that. So I'm amazed that there's still 90 people still here. So, and I've had a few messages saying thank you, they've had to go. Is there anything else anybody wants to ask before we say goodnight? David Oliver made an excellent suggestion earlier that we should perhaps be doing this on a regular basis, kind of him to volunteer someone to organise it. I'm happy to organise it again if anybody would like to. And I suppose part of this is to engage other professionals, isn't it? So, it'd be lovely if we did this again in a couple of months' time and we invited other colleagues and contacts from all, walks of the healthcare profession, just so that we can keep sharing, sharing our news that this is working well, and it's definitely worth at least not dismissing it if patients raise it. So yeah, would anybody like to say anything else before we go? I'll take that as a no. And I'd just like to thank.
I just say, sorry, I've just seen someone say that David or Ian, I assume that's me, David, do you do practice talks for DMTs and our surgery PCN to help educate? I'm sufficiently mad about this. I'll sit here and talk to anyone about low carb in type 1 or anything else I do. So the invitation, the offer is out there.
Fantastic. That's really, really good. Thank you. So thank you to everybody for their contributions tonight. It's been I found it really interesting. I hope you have too. And lovely to see so many people here. So many thanks, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye now.